Africa's insurgents, the truth Western media won't show you. The lie you were sold. Turn on CNN, BBC, or France 24 and you'll hear the same story on repeat. Africa is under siege by Islamic extremists. Militants backed by Al-Qaeda or ISIS are burning villages, enslaving children, and destabilizing governments. But ask yourself, who controls that narrative? Who benefits from Africa being seen as a continent of chaos? Because here's the kicker: most of these so-called terrorist attacks aren't random acts of extremism. They're either exaggerated, manipulated, or outright false flags. Mercenaries, often Western-trained, disguise themselves as jihadists, sowing terror to justify foreign military bases, mining contracts, and puppet governments. Meanwhile, the men and women we're calling insurgents? They're farmers, teachers, students. People who lost their land to foreign mining giants, or whose families were slaughtered by their own armies armed, trained, and funded by the West. Who are Africa's insurgents? Let's set the record straight. Africa's insurgents aren't some faceless army of fanatics. They are ordinary people who picked up arms because they had no other choice. Burkina Faso, the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland, VDP. Created to defend villages when state armies failed. Made up of farmers, herders, and everyday citizens. They protect communities not only from extremist violence but also from predatory corporations and corrupt politicians. The VDP is more than a militia, it's a people's army. Poorly armed but highly motivated, they've become symbols of resistance across the Sahel. Mali, the Azawad movement. Born from Tuareg demands for dignity, independence, and control of their land. Branded as separatists and extremists, but in reality, they seek autonomy over lands exploited for uranium and oil. Many factions shifted from secessionist demands to defending their people against government crackdowns. These fighters don't want global jihad. They want control over their resources. They want a seat at the table stolen from them for decades. Niger, Chad, and Central Africa. In Niger, villagers resist French-controlled uranium mining that powers Europe's lights while their children live in darkness. In Chad and CAR, self-defense militias have risen against brutal armies and mercenaries like Wagner or French Foreign Legion remnants. Why would a farmer leave his plow for a rifle? Why would a student abandon books for bullets? Because when peaceful protest is met with massacre, when your land is stolen in broad daylight, and when your leaders bow to foreign powers, you are left with no other option. Foreign resource looting. France takes uranium from Niger, gold from Mali, and cotton from Burkina Faso while locals remain in poverty. US AFRICOM and French Barkhane forces claim to fight terror but conveniently guard the same mines fueling Western economies. When you loot a people's resources and leave them hungry, don't be surprised when they fight back. Puppet governments. Many African leaders are handpicked by Western powers. They serve Paris, Washington, or London, not their people. When leaders like Sankara, Lumumba, or Gaddafi resisted, they were assassinated or overthrown. State-sponsored violence. Villages accused of harboring insurgents are often bombed or burned by national armies. Soldiers trained by the West have committed atrocities on civilians, creating the very anger that fuels insurgency. Labeling people terrorists is the easiest way to silence them. But behind every so-called insurgent is a story of injustice ignored. The false flag machine. Now let's talk about the biggest secret: not all attacks in the Sahel are what they seem. Reports show many so-called jihadist raids suspiciously coincide with political events, like when African nations consider cutting ties with France. Witnesses in Mali and Burkina Faso claim attackers often spoke foreign languages, sometimes even French or English. Intelligence leaks reveal that Western-trained soldiers and mercenaries have carried out massacres, only for local populations to be blamed. In short, chaos is manufactured. Every attack becomes an excuse for foreign troops to stay, foreign companies to dig deeper, and African leaders to cling to power. The alternative story. So if insurgents aren't just terrorists, what are they? They are guardians of villages. They are protectors of ancestral land. They are rebels against puppet states. Yes, there are extremists. Yes, there are criminals. But painting the entire resistance as jihadist terrorism is a smokescreen designed to keep Africa weak, divided, and dependent. Africa's Spring 2.0. What we're witnessing is nothing short of an African Spring 2.0. In the 1960s, newly independent nations rose against colonial masters. Today, a new generation is rising not just with protests, but with rifles, refusing to bow. In Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, military juntas supported by the people are kicking out French troops. Civilian militias defend villages and rebuild communities. Pan-African movements are calling for unity, sovereignty, and resource control. This is bigger than insurgency, it's revolution. The Western fear. Why does the West panic at these movements? Because they threaten the system. If Africa controls its own gold, uranium, and oil, Europe's lights go dark. America's tech industry stalls. The French economy collapses. That's why every resistance fighter is branded a terrorist. That's why every revolution is smeared as extremism. Because the real threat isn't jihad, it's independence. The human face. Let's not forget, behind every fighter is a human being. A mother in Burkina Faso who lost her son when soldiers torched her village. A student in Mali who joined rebels after seeing his school bombed. A miner in Niger who watched foreigners take uranium from under his feet, while his family starved. These aren't extremists. They're people who were pushed too far. The future. So where does this lead? The Sahel is at a tipping point. If the West continues its game of exploitation and false flags, more Africans will rise. More villages will join the resistance. And what started as local insurgencies will transform into a continent-wide revolution. This is the African Spring 2.0 and it cannot be stopped. The next time you hear the word insurgent, remember this: it might not mean terrorist. It might mean freedom fighter. It might mean a villager who refused to surrender. So don't just swallow the headlines. Question them. Investigate. Spread the truth. Because Africa's fight for liberation is not just Africa's fight, it's humanity's fight. Africa's insurgents, the revolution the West won't show you. Subscribe. Share. Wake up the world.